Hey everyone, Al Fragnoli, Zach Suddy, League of Leaders. Tonight we are joined by Dr. Mike Smith. Doc is the CEO of John Mattone Global and the ILEC lead trainer. Doc, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you here. We've got a couple questions lined up for you. The first one, Doc, we want to ask you is you have an extensive military background. What are some of the leadership lessons that you learned from your time in the service?
Yeah, really good question. Again, thank you for having me. So I did a total of 26 years in the Air Force, was all over the place, had a lot of different jobs. About 10 years in is where I really started getting into that leadership kind of role. In my last 5 years, I was a first sergeant, and then the last 3 years on the Thunderbirds. So one of the things that kind of a theme throughout, and it just really culminated in the more senior I got, was kind of four things come to mind, right? Trust, communication, teamwork, and then most importantly, that wingman concept, right? Always having someone there to watch your back, to partner with, to bounce things off of, kind of like a coach or a mentor or a guidance, right? Career guidance counselor or whatever. So I would say those few things, right? Trust in your team and the people that you deploy with, that you work with, that you're counting on to help you get the mission done, right? Again, teamwork, you're not in it by yourself, right? Everyone has a role. And when everyone executes their role and their specific job, everything just kind of comes together and gets pulled off. Just like on the Thunderbirds, right? 120 people enlisted in the hangar, all different jobs, right? Finance, QA, IT, public affairs, personnel, logistics, aircraft maintainers, right? Everyone had a specific role. But when we would get to an air show, everyone would hit the ground running, and you know that the other person was going to do their job. You did your job. There was communication, trust, and teamwork. And then that resulted in the air show going off without a hitch. So those are the things that really stuck out to me, that if you don't have them in any organization, right, things could start to go haywire.
So, Dr. Mike, yeah, I can already hear it in what you shared with us, but I want to learn a little bit more about you becoming a leadership coach. You're a
Mhm.
leadership coach now, you're a lead trainer. What attracted you to this field?
So one of the things that I would have to say, throughout all my time in the Air Force and then 10 years with Berkshire Hathaway, as I'm sure we've all seen, right? I've been on both sides of the leadership coin, right? I've been an employee and a follower of some leaders, at times mostly good, some bad, some indifferent. But then I've also been a leader, hopefully good, right? All the time. But I'm sure I had bad days and some indifferent days. But being on both sides, the one thing that I noticed is, you hear the cliche saying that the struggle is real. Well, it really is, right? When you're in a leadership role and you have not only your employees and both internal and external customers depending on you, as well as your boss and your leaders depending on you, that's a pretty huge responsibility. Even at the senior role, now you're talking the entire company relying on you, as well as the community and stakeholders and corporate social responsibility and all the other stuff, board of directors, right? So the one thing that really attracted me to leadership coaching is seeing everything I did over those 36 years kind of really helped me to realize that if I could spend my time pouring into that person that's in the best position within an organization to impact culture, retention, morale, productivity, community involvement, that perception, that culture, right? If I could pour into that one individual and fundamentally help them transform, then by default, that all spills over and trickles down into every other area of the organization. So my efforts, by then pouring into that person, right? My passion, my energy, my care, my concern, my vulnerability, my trust, my genuineness, my authenticity, by pouring that into them and modeling it, that also allows them to model it. But then that transformation starts. And again, my efforts are just, again, by default, kind of multiplied as it trickles down and just starts to spread throughout the organization. So that's really what made me hone in on leadership. it's kind of the best bang for the buck, right?
I love it. That's awesome stuff that you shared right there, Doc. And you mentioned passion, and I think the best leadership coaches out there have a passion for what they do, and we can hear that in your voice right there. So I love what you shared right there. To kind of piggyback off that question, the next question we want to ask you is about your work with John Mattone and Intelligent Leadership Executive Coaching (ILEC). So you've been there for several years now. What attracted you to ILEC, and what do you love most about working with ILEC?
So I gotta be honest. The thing that attracted me, and I think I might have shared this story with you, Al, is when I hit that wall after about 10 years in Berkshire Hathaway. I hit that wall where I just didn't feel like I was making a difference anymore, making an impact. And I just felt really like stuck in my role. My senior leadership role had transitioned from one where I was able to get out in the field in front of the employees and actually build relationships. And I knew I cared because they saw me caring. And it kind of started to shift to, you know what, you're good at what you do, but we really want you to stay behind your desk and do more reports and create PowerPoints and spreadsheets and stats, and totally important job within an organization, right? I mean, you have to have those things. It just wasn't me. So the internal conflict then really started surfacing to the point where I just was not having fun anymore. And my wife noticed it. So anyhow, I came home one day and asked her if she would be cool if I walked away from that corporate job with a title and a steady paycheck, right? And to start my own thing with my first paycheck coming eventually, right? And so after 5 nights of sleeping on the couch, no, she didn't. No. But with her support, and her team, right? She was my teammate, my wingman, still is to this day after 30 years. I kind of just launched off to start my own training, speaking, and coaching company, right? So I started getting some seminars, doing a lot of workshops. But then one thing I noticed, it started happening more and more at the end of those workshops and those seminars. People would start saying, Doc, that was really great content, powerful stuff. I want to work with you. What do you got? And I didn't have any, what do you got? Like, I can give you 3 or 6 hours and we're good to go, other than maybe some storytelling and stuff. So the one thing that attracted me to ILEC is the very structured, linear A to Z process of coaching, right? The tools and the assessments that are in place are fundamental to actually having scientific measurable data at your fingertips that you could then help a person wrap their hands, their head, and their heart around and turn that into a leadership development plan. So there's like a solid process there. That's the science piece of it, which allowed me then to bring my art piece of it, the human element, again, the care, the passion, the compassion, the understanding, right? That allowed me to bring that to the table. And oh yeah, by the way, now I can supplement and reinforce it with data. So that's the one thing that attracted me to it. And right now, I think in my current role as the lead trainer and the performance coach, one thing I love the most about ILEC is getting to work every day with people like you, Al, our coaches, right? To get to share some of that wisdom and that experience and that knowledge, and pass it on. And just again, the team of coaches that we have, right? The camaraderie, the wingman concept, the trust, the communication, like that's what I love about it. It really is like a family.
So, Doc, thank you for sharing that. And I think, those rules you talk about are very important, whether the gathering the data, creating PowerPoints. But some of us really need that human connection to make that impact. And I can really relate to how you wanted to get out there and feel like you were making an impact, and that is because of the relationships you build with others. That is great to hear. So talking about John Mattone, he developed his 50 laws of intelligent leadership, all of which are very unique and powerful in their own right. What are 1 or 2 of those 50 laws that you like most and maybe find the most powerful?
Very good question. So for me, there's 2 laws in particular that stand out. It's law number 5, which is, the key to unlocking massive potential is making the decision to be vulnerable. The second one would be law number 20, just like as in medicine, prescription before diagnosis is malpractice, right? So those two things, the vulnerability piece, that is, even today's society, like when I was doing seminars, before the pandemic shut down, it's funny, I would have a room full of anywhere from 30 to several hundred people. And I would always get to this issue of vulnerability, right? And emotions and personal responsibility and ownership and asking for help, right? And every single time I would get to that point in the seminar, I would say, okay, now I want you to answer this question for. I know it's a hard one, but I want everyone to chime in and just kind of shout out your answers, right? So in today's society, asking for help is a sign of, and everyone at the same time, weakness, right? I mean, every time, right? So that's still kind of a societal concept or perception out there, right? That asking for help, dude, that's weak. Like you got this, man. Why are you in this position, right? So to get people to a mindset of vulnerability, which is not weakness, vulnerability is actually a very courageous decision that shows wisdom and maturity in the fact that you're still willing to learn. You're not as good as you can be. You might be great, but you got a lot to learn. There's still people smarter than you. And by the way, you've heard this before, I'm sure, right? If you're in a room where you are the smartest person and you're in the wrong room, you need to find a different one, right? So just that learning, that ability to tell yourself, you know what, it's okay. And I give myself permission to ask for help, to learn, to accept feedback, to grow, to transform, right? So that's the vulnerability piece, just letting the guards down, right? Letting people in. And so the second one, prescription before diagnosis of malpractice, just like in the world of medicine, the same thing in corporate reinvention and just organizations all over, right? It's so easy to look at an initial snapshot or initial incident or a high level thing and think you got the answer. So you start to the road to implementation, right? One of the things that I'll share a quick story. When I was the corporate safety leader in Berkshire Hathaway, this whole prescription before diagnosis thing kind of sticks out to me because we would have, as an example, an employee that would be in a job site, electricians, right, getting ready to leave a job site after working for 8 hours and back the company truck into a bollard and dent the bumper, right? So of course, that's a preventable equipment damage. So you would have to do a root cause analysis. So initially when I got there, the tendency was, well, we can do this root cause analysis in 10 minutes. Dude backed into the bollard, it's his fault. So let's discipline the employee and move on, case closed. That's really a inaccurate prescription based on zero diagnosis, right? So if you really start to peel back the onion in that particular case, well, what happened? Well, the guy had a spotter, but the spotter didn't back him up. He had a cone at the back of the truck that he picked up, but didn't do a walk around, just threw it in the back of the truck and didn't walk around to refamiliarize himself with the surroundings. Right? There was actually 2 other vehicles there too, but the work site was so crowded, he backed in towards that bollard when just like half a block up, there were plenty of parking spots. So he parked in the wrong spot and no one said anything to him. So now, you're starting to get into, these are probably kind of issues of training. Like we need to revisit inspecting your work site, using that wingman, a spotter, right? All that kind of stuff. So the same thing in coaching and even in leadership, right? To jump to a conclusion that you act on without really taking the time to understand and gather the data and the facts could be pretty no bueno.
Doc, I love the example that you shared right there. I think it is critically important, that we have a process in place and some training. So I love how you related that to law number 20. Law number 5, I love that you talked about being vulnerable. I think this is so critical for leaders. Zach and I had a guest on in Jody Ostergen probably about a month or so ago now, and she mentioned that some of the best leaders she believes are vulnerable. And this was probably one of the first times we had a guest say this. So I couldn't agree with you more on that critical importance there for leaders to possess. Doc, we're going to wrap it up with one final question for you. So you had touched upon culture a little bit earlier. Let's take a minute and look at culture a little bit more, as we know it's obviously critically important for companies to invest in culture and make sure that their work environment has a strong culture. So a recent study showed that 86% of people believe that culture is critically important to them. However, only 19% of those people believe that their company has a good culture. So, what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that companies and leaders are missing while looking to implement a strong culture in the workplace?
That's a really good question, and thanks for asking that. So I would have to say one of the fundamental things is, as a leader, I would have to say that a common mistake would be just if everything is going okay, your P&L looks good, your retention's okay, things are just kind of cruising along, there's a tendency to equate that to a good culture, which, and I think we can all agree, that's not always necessarily the case, right? You can have people doing the job because they have to, or they're being told to, or they need a job, or they love their specific job. So it all just happens to fall together. But effective production doesn't automatically mean great culture. I think another thing too is, with a culture, one of the things that we miss the boat on sometimes, I think, as leaders, is coming in as the leader and kind of setting the tone and trying to build the culture on our individual personalities. So personality driven culture versus a legacy inspired culture, right? The legacy inspired culture is the culture of the organization and everything it stands for and the people that make it up that will stand the test of time. So regardless of who's in charge, the culture will always be intact because of the legacy, versus trying to wrap culture around the individual leader who's there at a time. So another good example is when I was on the Thunderbirds. Like, the Thunderbirds have been around since 1951, Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. They moved to Vegas in 1953. The leader, the commander, changes every 2 years. They just celebrated the 60th anniversary this year. So that's what, 30 commanders. But the culture on the team never changes and never misses a beat. Commander and the other pilots, they rotate every 2 years. The longest an enlisted person can do is 3 years, with a possible extension to 4. So you're talking a constant rotation of people and backgrounds and attitudes and thoughts and ways of doing things from where they came from, right? I mean, every 2 years over a period of 60 years. You could be a brand new member on the Thunderbirds and go overseas to do an air show. And just by virtue of you wearing that patch, you could walk the crowd line and everyone would associate you with being a Thunderbird, not a new one, not an old one, being a Thunderbird. I want to shake your hand and say thank you, right? That's a legacy inspired culture. It stands the test of time and it just continues to evolve and get better regardless of who's in control or who's leading the organization, right? So I think that can be a misstep that maybe we need to wrap our hands around. Again, that personality driven versus legacy inspired. So I think those are two things that kind of maybe allow us to miss the boat on creating that great sustainable culture.
I love that. That's all great information that you shared with us there, Doc. And that wraps it up for this evening. So first of all, thank you for your service to the country. So that's fantastic. And thank you so much for devoting some of your time. We know you're a busy guy and you got a lot on your table. So thank you for joining Zach and I. You mentioned a couple things that stuff. We talked about the laws already and being vulnerable. So I love that. You mentioned the culture aspect there and how that's critically important to a company to be successful. You mentioned making a difference and making an impact, and you left that job from corporate America and moved into a leadership coaching role. And we talked to John Mattone a couple of weeks ago, and he had a similar path. And I just think that is very interesting. And I love that you had the courage to step out of your comfort zone and take that chance and do that. And it sounds like, you have a great supportive spouse. And Zach likes to say, behind every great man is a great woman. So, so we know that you have a strong support system there, and we love that. You did mention early on as well, you talked about your military experience and trust, communication, teamwork, and having a mentor and coach. I love that you mentioned that. And you talked about the importance of everybody having a role and everybody doing their jobs. And that that kind of resonated with me, and it made me think. I know you're a huge Pittsburgh Steeler guy, Doc, but it made me think of the New England Patriots and those strong Tom Brady teams that were out there, and everybody doing their job. But I love that you mentioned that. That is so critically important to every successful organization and team that's out there. So a lot of wonderful highlights and points that you shared with us. So thank you again, Doc, for coming on with us. Zach and I truly appreciate your time and your insight.
Yeah, thank you both very much. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Doc.